Hello, I'm Denver 7's Micah Smith, and welcome to Denver Decides. This community partnership is dedicated to accessible and transparent elections. The partnership includes the League of Women Voters of Denver and Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation. Denver Decides is presented by Denver 8 TV. Our goal today is to present a ballot issue forum as we gear up for the election on Tuesday, November 8th. Among the decision items for voters on this year's ballot is initiated ordinance number 305, which asks Denver voters if there should be a tax increase to provide legal representation to those facing eviction. Our format for this forum will follow a basic debate outline with opening and closing statements, dialogue between the speakers, and will include responses to questions submitted by the forum organizers. Let's begin by meeting the participants who will present and discuss the pros and cons of initiated ordinance number 305. Beginning at my right is Ren Echo. She's a local tenants' rights activist and organizer for No Taxation Without Representation. And Ren will be speaking for the ordinance question. No eviction without representation. Thank you for that correction, Ren. And to my left is Destiny Bossert, Director of Government Affairs for the Apartment Association of Metro Denver. Ms. Bossert will be speaking against the ordinance. Welcome to both of you. We will begin with 1 minute and 30-second opening statements from both speakers, and as you can see, your speaker timers are right out in front of both of you. Ren Echo, you're up first, speaking for initiated ordinance number 305, and you have 1.5 minutes.
Okay. Every year in this city, rich landlords and big real estate companies like the ones my opponent represents kick around 9,000 people out of their own homes. Most of them minorities, and the vast majority just for the supposed crime of having financial difficulties. These people lose jobs, they lose health care, kids have to drop out of school or change schools, they wind up with eviction records that make it much harder to find housing for years, and a huge portion of them become homeless. Currently, this is treated as an automatic process, with less than 1% of tenants having a lawyer and 75% not even able to show up to court. Judges instead move to default judgment without even looking at the details of each case. This is wrong and has to end. What this initiative would do is provide free universal legal representation to all tenants facing eviction, inform them of those rights right at the beginning of the process, and create program infrastructure to ensure that it's best being used to keep families housed. Because currently, tenants with lawyers actually win their cases 94% of the time, and other cities that have done this have seen their eviction rates drop by more than half. This tells us that the majority of these cases are unjust to begin with, even by the current legal definitions. This would be funded by a $75 yearly fee paid by landlords, with an exemption for the smallest landlords, to ensure that it's people like my opponent and the organization that they represent who are causing the problem in the first place that are also the ones paying to fix it. And the people who can afford it are the ones bearing the cost. It's a grassroots campaign run by renters trying to keep ourselves and our neighbors in our own homes and off the streets. Please vote yes on 305.
All right. Thank you, Ren. And now the opening statement from Destiny Bossert, speaking against the initiated ordinance.
Initiative 305 will make living in Denver more expensive by imposing a $12 million tax on housing that comes at a time when housing is already so expensive in Colorado. This initiative is too expensive. By imposing a $75 tax per unit, they will be generating $12 million, which is about 10 times more money than is needed for the service. Primarily, this is because there are far more rental units than people presume and far fewer evictions. Denver averages about 800 evictions filings per month, which is about 9,000 eviction filings per year. But 85% of those evictions are settled, and only 15% of those evictions actually go to trial. If you paid $300 for each of those evictions that went to trial, and I use the number 300 because that is a San Francisco uses for their number under their program, it equates to $1.2 million per year, rather than $12 million per year. We already have programs in place. Denver has a program with the Department of Housing of Stability that provides representation for people that make 80% area median income or less. We have the State Eviction Legal Defense Fund, and we have several federal programs as well. But the biggest flaw in this initiative is it's unfair to the poor. There's no means testing for people who pay this tax or people who benefit from this initiative. And so we get a situation where the poor is paying more for housing.
Destiny, your time is up. But now it's time for rebuttals. You will have, Destiny, 1 minute, which you can offer a rebuttal of Ren's opening statement, or you can expand on your opening statement.
Okay. I will rebut.
Okay.
So she is right. People are hurting in Colorado, and it's the housing costs. We need to focus on the root of the problem, which is the lack of supply. In 2008, building completely ceased because the housing market crashed, and we never kept up with supply. Now millennials are entering the housing market, and there's a housing shortage, not just in Colorado, but everywhere. And that is why we are seeing increase in housing prices. And rent. So it's important that we focus on the root of the problem and that we don't put a Band-Aid on something, that we really find real solutions. And I think, even rental assistance would make more sense in this scenario.
All right. And Ren, you now have 1 minute in which you can offer a rebuttal of Destiny's opening statement or expand on your opening statement.
Okay. I'd like to rebut that if you're arguing that the $6.25 a month cost of this program is going to be passed on to renters and drive up the rent, statistically we know that rents are primarily determined by market forces and aren't that heavily correlated to taxation rates. Meanwhile, the rent has gone up $200 a month the past couple of years, which is because frankly, exploitation. It's well above the cost of operation. And I agree that we should provide more affordable housing, that's the root cause of the issue here. But we already have a lot of housing that it helps to keep people in instead of kicking them out of. And this program, if it were the case that we would have any money left over, the program explicitly provides infrastructure to ensure that that's used for wraparound services and things that can be used to keep tenants in their homes.
Right. And now we move on to our one-on-one rounds, and our speakers will have some choices when it's their turn. And beginning with Ren, you can ask Destiny a direct question, and Destiny would have 1 minute to answer that question. Or you may take that minute to expand on your previous statement, Ren.
So I'm up?
Yep, you're up.
Cool. Again, statistically, we know that rents are primarily determined by market forces and don't necessarily correlate to taxation rates. The rent has gone up dramatically over the past 2 years, $200 a month each year, with no comparable increase in taxation, well above cost of operation. The landlord market is also one of the only industries that currently has no licensing requirements and therefore very little regulation, meaning low overhead costs. Meanwhile, real estate companies have some of the widest profit margins of any industry, currently around 30%. So how do you explain and try to justify that discrepancy? What actually determines what you charge people in rent?
So like I mentioned, there's a lack of supply, which is driving up housing costs. But a housing provider's revenue comes from rent. So with anything in our economy, when you increase fees or taxes, that gets passed on to the consumer. And so if it costs more to make a product, to maintain a product, that product is going to be more expensive. And we see this in every industry. If you put a tax on beef, your hamburger is going to cost more at McDonald's. We see it in the healthcare industry when doctors were required to carry med mal insurance. Housing or healthcare costs went up, and our insurance premiums went up to afford that increase in costs.
Now, Destiny, you can ask Ren a direct question, and Ren, you would have 1 minute to respond. You may also take the minute to expand on a previous statement.
Yes, so I just want to touch on you saying that rent would only increase by $6. And with all due respect, I truly believe that's intellectually dishonest, because you're not accounting for the millions of dollars in legal fees that are going to increase on behalf of tenants, and correspondingly going to increase for housing providers as well. And that's going to increase the cost of doing business with residents, and that is going to increase the cost of housing.
Right. Now we will continue with another round. Destiny, you'll begin. And as before, you can ask Ren a direct question, and Ren, you would have 1 minute to answer her question, or you may take 1 minute to expand on a previous statement.
Please explain how 305 and having a lawyer keep someone in their home when they cannot pay their rent moving forward.
Right. So what having a lawyer allows people to do is to work out negotiation with their landlord, right? They often reach an out of court non-judgment stipulation, something like that, where nobody wants to go to trial, right? So they often find these kinds of agreements where they agree to pay their debts. In return, they're able to stay in their homes. Having a lawyer advocate for them also means oftentimes that even if they do have to move, that they're not winding up with that eviction record that's going to follow them for the rest of their life, which means that they're able to maintain housing and not be discriminated against, and therefore wind up homeless a lot of the time.
And back to you, Ren. Again, you can ask Destiny a direct question, and Destiny, you would have 1 minute to answer that question. Ren, you may also take 1 minute to expand on a previous statement.
Okay. So you said the funding for this program is way too much money, but we estimated our costs based on discussions with legal providers and other programs throughout the country that are already doing this work. It's interesting that you brought up San Francisco, because their Right to Counsel program is funded at around $12 million for a city with a similar number of evictions to Denver. We talked with Councilwomen Sita Baca and Sawyer, who passed the existing program, and they told us that when they talked to mom and pop landlords, one of their top concerns was actually not having a reliable funding source for the city's current legal aid program. According to the Denver Post, it's on track to spend $4 million in its first year, but represented only 1,383 renters out of 7,111 eviction cases. That's just 19%, which gives an average of $868 per case, which would mean over $8 million already to represent everybody, and that's just for partial representation. Your main source for your claims, I think, is the Common Sense Institute. At least that's what I've seen the Apartment Owners Association cite before, which is essentially the pet think tank for the Apartment Owners Association, who have an obvious interest in tenants not being represented. So I'd be curious to see where those numbers come from as to where are you getting that math about the estimated costs.
So, sorry. Well, as I touched on, 95% of these cases are for simple non-payment. So the legal issue is no more complex as if you can pay your rent or not. Out of those 800 cases filed, 85% are settled usually, and only 15% actually go to trial. So I'm using that 300 number on those cases that go to trial, which is what San Francisco used under their program, and that equates to 1.2 million.
Right.
Not 12 million.
And we begin another round, Ren. We will begin with you again. You can ask Destiny a direct question, and Destiny, you'll have 1 minute to answer the question, or you may take 1 minute to expand on a previous statement. If you do choose a direct question, we just ask for time's sake that you keep it concise.
Okay, I have a question. How can you disingenuously pretend to care about renters when your entire career interest is in fucking them over? The Apartment Owners Association represents less than 1% of the population, but owns 75% of all Denver apartments, which means you're also the ones who chose to raise the rent $200 a month on average both of the past 2 years. And you're also the ones evicting people. Now you're here tonight opposing an initiative that is being pushed by and for renters. Do you really think that you can tell us what we want and expect renters to believe you?
My members consist of Denver Housing Authority, Coalition of the Homeless. I don't just represent large landlords. I have mom and pops. I have, a lady that owns a single unit in Wash Park, who's elderly. Like, we represent a wide range of housing providers, and we are here because we care that this is going to increase housing once again when people cannot afford it. Eggs are more expensive, gas, people are hurting right now, and this is something that they can't afford. And for someone who, this is available to anyone can use this representation. They don't have to qualify or make a certain amount, and that's the biggest flaw in this proposal.
And we want to go back to you, Destiny. As before, you can ask Ren a direct and concise question. Ren, you would have 1 minute to answer the question, or Destiny, you may take 1 minute to expand on a previous statement.
Yeah, I just want to finish my thought here. So, in a criminal case, a judge says, if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. But you have to qualify for that indigent status, right? I don't think I pronounced that right. But there's means testing. But this initiative allows someone who lives in a high rise, downtown, in a luxury apartment, they have access to this free representation. And the poor, Denver's subsidized and affordable residents are paying more for housing. They're paying for that resident to have free legal representation, which is so unethical with this proposal.
That brings us to our final one-on-one round, and Destiny, you will begin. As before, you can ask Ren a direct question, and Ren will have 1 minute to answer the question. You may also take 1 minute to expand on a previous statement.
I was hoping that you could point out where in the measure it says that money can be used for wraparound services to prevent evictions.
I mean, it says that in there. Sorry, I don't have the text of the initiative right in front of me. Well, it includes program infrastructure. I mean, this is the primary thing. So we built in a program coordinator to ensure that it's being carried out in the spirit it was intended, which is to, again, keep tenants housed. It also includes a tenant oversight committee to ensure that renters are having a voice in that process and not being represented by landlords or politicians who might not have their best interests at heart. And that money gets put into the program so that it can be used if there's extra money, which again we estimate that we'll need most of that money, that it can be used for these other things through that program in order to keep renters in their home.
And to wrap it up, Ren, your turn. And as before, you can ask Destiny a direct question. Destiny, you would have 1 minute to answer the question, or you may take 1 minute to expand on a previous statement.
Yeah, I just want to ask, how do you live with yourself, caping for an industry that generates millions of dollars in profits every year off the exploitation of Denver's poorest residents who are just trying to survive, jacking up their rent way beyond what anybody can afford, and kicking people out of their homes onto the street, all for something as worthless as usually watching the numbers go up in the bank accounts of people who already have more money than they could ever need, and now spending $125,000 to oppose these protections for the most basic civil rights for renters, which are the rights that we already afford to accused criminals. How can you possibly justify that?
Our members care about their residents. They love what they do. They love providing housing. Again, 95% of these eviction filings are for simple non-payment of rent. And 85% of those cases are settled. Only 15% of those cases go to trial. And this is just going to increase the cost of housing. It has nothing to do with landlords. This is about residents paying more in a time when they can't afford gas.
Well, our next round will feature our speakers responding to questions submitted by our forum organizers, and then we'll have 1 minute to respond. We will begin with Ren Echo, who is here speaking in support of initiated ordinance number 305, which again asks Denver voters if there should be a tax increase to provide legal representation to those facing eviction. Ren, your first question goes as follows. How would you suggest that the program's coordinator and tenants committee find and recruit attorneys to advise and represent those who have been evicted?
Yep, so we worked with the city last year, specifically Councilwoman Cedarbach and Sawyer, to pass a more stripped-down version of this program, as you already mentioned. And so the way that currently works is that the city holds contracts with certain legal aid providers, including the COVID-19 Eviction Events Project, Colorado Legal Services. So we've talked to those organizations and the people who run them. And we assume that if they keep those same contracts, what this funding will allow them to do is to create more jobs in that field, because they're confident that there are lawyers who want to do that work, but the jobs aren't available, and so they're taking higher paying jobs in other fields. And so if they are able to create those positions, those organizations can recruit more people.
Right. And now Destiny Bossert, who is here speaking against initiated ordinance number 305. Here is your first question. What present types of funding and resources can you cite that go towards supporting tenants?
Yeah, so I mentioned several earlier. We have Denver has the program through the Department of Housing Stability, who provides representation for those who make 80% area median income or less. We have the Eviction Legal Defense Fund. We have several federal programs through HUD, and there are numerous nonprofits that provide rental assistance and representation and resources to pay utilities and stuff like that.
Right, and now it's time for our next round of questions from our organizers. Destiny, you will respond first and have 1 minute to answer. Your question goes as follows. Will multifamily housing providers bring more renters to court if this goes into effect?
Colorado law requires that landlords file an eviction anytime there is ambiguity of whether the premises has been voluntarily returned. So every tenant that vacates a property or disappears, they have to file an eviction, unfortunately, due to Colorado law.
And now, Ren, your next question. What protections are in place to make sure the attorney's work is effective and fees are not excessive?
That's a good question. I think currently there's not a lot, but there are, there's these organizations that are providing these services, and typically they have some administrative oversight in ensuring that that's the case. I will say also that most of these tenant rights lawyers, having worked with them extensively, are people who are in that job trying to help people. So they're not typically charging people more than what they can afford. And in fact, again, the problem is primarily that they can't afford to represent people pro bono in a lot of these cases, and therefore they need the funding that Newer would provide. There are also certain legal restrictions on what lawyers can get away with. I don't know as much about that though, personally.
And that brings us to the end of our Q&A segment, and we move now to closing statements. Each speaker will have 1.5 minutes for a closing statement, and we will reverse the order of opening statements, which means we will begin with Destiny Bossert. Destiny, you have 90 seconds for your closing statement.
Initiative 305 will make living in Denver more expensive at a time when housing costs are absurd. In Colorado, they're expensive enough. This program is 10 times more expensive than the program requires. It's unfair to the poor. There's no means testing. Anyone can take advantage of this free representation regardless of their income. It's bad policy for the government to use taxpayer money to pay people to sue each other in civil suits. We should be focusing more on the root of the problem, which is lack of supply, which is driving up housing costs. Rental assistance obviously seems more effective in this situation, and I encourage you and your communities to vote no on 305. We just can't afford it.
Okay. And now a closing statement from Ren Echo. And Ren, you have 90 seconds for your response.
Okay. So first of all, yeah, I mean, it's just disingenuous, frankly, to act like this. Again, $75 yearly fee, which is $6.25 a month, is somehow going to break the bank for people when it's those same renters who would have the benefits of the program, right? So $6.25 a month is less than 1% of my rent, but if this were to pass, for that same amount of money, I would effectively have a lawyer on retainer for if I were to be unable to pay my rent, including that same $6, which statistically would give me a more than 50% chance of staying in my home, and therefore making the likelihood that I'm probably already struggling to pay with my rent a lot less catastrophic if it happens. Also, the idea that it's unfair to the poor because it's a lack of means testing is ridiculous. That's kind of the point. The bureaucratic barriers and red tape that come with means testing typically mean that the most vulnerable people aren't able to access these kinds of programs. And furthermore, we want everybody to be accessing these programs because for sure, not everybody necessarily deserves to win their case outright, but everybody deserves a right to a fair trial. And we're not paying for people to sue each other. As you said, people are already being brought to court due to Colorado law. We're paying so that they have an actual defense, which they need and deserve.
Well, on behalf of the forum organizers, I'd like to thank both of you for your participation in this forum. Our thanks also to the Denver Decides partners, which include Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation and the League of Women Voters of Denver. Denver Decides is presented by Denver 8 TV. We hope we've given you a fair look at the pro and con arguments for initiated ordinance number 305. Remember, Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th. Let your voice be heard, be sure you're registered, and be sure and vote. For complete election information online, you can go to denverdecides.org. I'm Micah Smith from Denver 7. Thanks for joining us.